Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. So by now you've probably heard that on Saturday, U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and brought him and his wife to the United States. On Monday, he pleaded not guilty to drug trafficking charges in a New York court. This is a major event for the U.S. and Venezuela, but it's also elicited reactions from countries all over the world, including China, Russia, and various European states. But it's very important for the Middle East as well. Venezuela is known to be very close to Iran, but Gulf states also have a relationship with the South American country, despite tensions between Maduro and the U.S. Hezbollah is also likely to be affected by the removal of Maduro, given its operations in Latin America and close ties with his government. In this episode, we'll be looking at what the removal of Maduro and the emergence of the new government in Venezuela means for the region, hearing from a number of our correspondents. Hope you enjoy. So we need to start with Iran. The Islamic Republic is very close to Venezuela, and they've been driven together by shared experience with the U.S. Both states are sanctioned by Washington, and both states have bad ties with the United States. But cooperation has been up and down in recent years. In 2020, Iran started sending fuel to Venezuela. Now, Venezuela has been in an energy crisis for many years, despite its vast oil reserves. And that's because its ability to refine oil has fallen into disarray. After 2020, Iran and Venezuela made a deal whereby Iran would send fuel in exchange for Venezuelan crude. In 2022, the Biden administration eased sanctions on Venezuela, and as a result, Venezuela sent more oil to the U.S. and others. Now, that led to a drop in the Iranian oil exports to Venezuela. They fell by 42% between 2022 and 2023, according to the U.S. Energy Info Administration. The sanctions were returned in 2024 when Venezuela barred opposition figures from its elections. Iran then moved to patch up ties with Venezuela. The parliament speaker visited in June of last year, and the defense minister went to Caracas in 2024. Iran has unsurprisingly expressed support for Venezuela amid the current situation. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held a call with his Venezuelan counterpart on Sunday and declared his support. Now, Al Monitor's correspondent in Tehran said that the fall of the Maduro administration could hurt Iran, pointing out that Venezuela was key to Iran's strategy of mitigating U.S. sanctions, as seen in the oil ties. But he said the fall of Maduro is also symbolic for the Islamic Republic. I'm going to read you an excerpt from our correspondent in Tehran's report from Saturday. Quote, "For years, Iran has boasted of its reach in Latin America, arguing that like-minded leftist governments can serve as a backyard for influence and counter U.S. global hegemony. Venezuela was the centerpiece of that strategy, one that remained politically aligned with Tehran, economically intertwined, and shared Tehran's rhetorical anti-U.S. defiance. The project, critics argue, unraveled in a matter of hours." And it's worth noting that all this is happening as Iran faces major protests against the government. Now, you may be thinking that the new government will be just as friendly to Iran as Maduro's. Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, was sworn in on Monday as acting president. But indications are that Rodriguez's new government might be more in line with the U.S. Rodriguez said on Sunday in an Instagram post that she will prioritize, quote, balanced and respectful international relations between the U.S. and Venezuela. That takes us to Hezbollah. Hezbollah, of course, is backed by Iran, but has also had close relations with Maduro in Venezuela in recent years. Here's Beatrice Farhat in Beirut on how the Iran-backed group could be impacted by the fall of Maduro.
The removal of Maduro in Venezuela is expected to deal a heavy blow to Hezbollah's financial network in the country and more broadly across South America. The group, which is heavily backed by Iran, is believed to run major drug smuggling and money laundering networks in Venezuela, mainly used to fund its activities in the region and in the world. Under Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, Venezuela is believed to have turned into a major operation hub for Hezbollah, which has reportedly and specifically used the Margarita Island to conduct training for its fighters and funding activities, according to several reports and to congressional hearings. The US has repeatedly accused Hezbollah of being involved in such operations, and it has already sanctioned individuals and companies for allegedly helping finance Hezbollah via Venezuela. One day after the US operation in Venezuela, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, he said in an interview with CBS that Venezuela must be rid of Hezbollah and its backer, Iran. So these statements point or signal a change or another blow to Hezbollah's financing activities, knowing that Hezbollah has already suffered heavy losses during its war with Israel last year in Lebanon. For its part, Hezbollah was quick to release a statement following the US operation and capture of Maduro and condemned what it called the terrorist aggression and American thuggery against Venezuela and a violation of its sovereignty.
It's worth noting that Hezbollah still has a presence in other parts of Latin America, not just Venezuela, especially the tri-border area between Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. The group has been accused of carrying out fundraising as well as drug trafficking in that area. In May of last year, the U.S. offered a reward for information on the group's activities in the tri-border region. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision-makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25, for a discount.
Okay, we're back. Trump administration concerns about Venezuela's ties with America's adversaries in the Middle East may have played a role in the decision to remove Maduro. Here's Al-Monitor's Pentagon correspondent, Jared Zuba, with some insight.
Trump on Saturday, articulated another point that has not been as frequently seen in press reporting on this subject. He accused the Maduro regime of, quote, hosting foreign adversaries in our region and acquiring menacing offensive weapons that could threaten U.S. interests and lives, end quote. And that's very likely, ostensibly, a reference to the Maduro government's ties with Iran. The Treasury Department, U.S. Treasury Department, sanctioned 10 individuals, I believe it was in late December, just after Christmas, for their alleged role in acquiring or attempting to acquire Iranian-made one-way attack drones, which certainly, if completed by the Maduro regime, would be a red line for Washington, given these weapons' proliferation in conflicts around the world and the difficulty of U.S. air defense systems in shooting them down. But the Trump administration has not publicly released evidence demonstrating, either publicly or to the UN Security Council, as far as we know, that the Maduro regime posed a direct and imminent threat to the United States and the security of its people. I think instead the broader message here from the Trump administration in abducting, in this unprecedented abduction of a foreign leader, and strikes on the Venezuelan military air bases. The message here is that the U.S. is the dominant player in the Western Hemisphere. I think the message is clear that the Trump administration is not going to hesitate for very long to use military force against targets that it deems either widely unpopular, unable to fight back, or insufficiently protected by international law, both for countries within the Western Hemisphere that they should fall into line with Washington's security interests, and for U.S. Allies as well.
Most Gulf states haven't commented on the U.S. operation to remove Maduro. Other countries that are close to the U.S. did, like the United Kingdom, France. But Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others in the Gulf have not offered statements. Qatar and Oman are exceptions. On Saturday, Qatar expressed, quote, deep concern for the situation in Venezuela, and they actually said that they are ready to participate in any effort to achieve a, quote, peaceful solution. On Sunday, Oman's foreign ministry called for restraint and dialogue. Both these states have a history of mediation, and there are actually indications that Qatar may have been involved in the talks over Maduro's future. The Miami Herald reported in October of 2025 that Qatar had served as an intermediary for a proposal by Rodriguez and other senior officials to serve as a more favorable alternative to Maduro. Now, Rodriguez denied the story at the time, but as noted, she's now calling for better ties with the U.S., and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is calling on the new Venezuelan government to enact policy changes more in line with U.S. interests. One expert told me on Monday that Qatar is positioning itself to mediate between the U.S. and Venezuela, given its relatively good ties with both, something that is somewhat unique on the international stage. Qatar indeed had friendly relations with Maduro's Venezuela. Rodriguez visited in April of 2025 and met Emir Atani. Now, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have fairly decent ties with Venezuela as well. Rodriguez visited the UAE in December of 2024 and met with President MBZ. Maduro went to Saudi Arabia in 2023, which was actually his second trip to the country, and held talks with Crown Prince MBS. The ties go back a long way, and Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Venezuela are all foundational members of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, aka OPEC, the oil cartel. But Venezuela isn't really a big trading partner of the Gulf. The Bolivarian Republic is closer to Iran, as we talked about, as well as Turkey. Turkey was in the top 5 of Venezuela's imports and exports in 2023, according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity. Also of interest to the Gulf is how the change in Venezuela will impact the oil market. Now, you'd think the U.S. action to remove Maduro would have had an effect on oil prices, given Trump's comments that the U.S. will control Venezuela's oil, and the fact that the country has some of the largest reserves of oil in the world. But so far, OPEC is staying on course in terms of their production boosts, and prices haven't actually moved that much. Here's Al Monitor's senior business correspondent, Jack Dudden, on why oil hasn't been overly impacted yet.
So far, we haven't seen a substantial impact of Maduro's capture on the global oil and energy markets. In fact, if you look today, we can see that Brent futures have been up around 0.8% to around $60 a barrel, while WTI futures are up a similar amount. So these are the two kind of main oil benchmarks, and these have actually increased. So it's barely been much of an increase. It's been quite stable because actually what has impacted oil investment more is the fear of oversupply, because if you look at the market, there's been a huge oversupply glut. And what happened last year, we saw crude prices tumble by more than 18%, which is the sharpest yearly drop since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And you've seen OPEC on Sunday, the OPEC Plus group, which consists of many Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, Algeria, Oman. They've actually kept their output stable and not increase output or decrease output, just to kind of stabilize the market amid the capture of Maduro. While Venezuela is believed to have the largest oil reserves in the world, the infrastructure around their energy has been substantially weakened, and they're barely pulling any crude out of the ground. OPEC reported that last year, Venezuela only pumped around 1.1 million barrels per day, which is only about 1% of the global supply of crude. So the likes of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Russia, Algeria will have much more of an impact on global supply and therefore oil prices than Venezuela. And also in Venezuela, exports of oil are currently near zero after, on December the 17th, the US implemented a blockade on oil tankers, which have been sanctioned, coming from a South American country. And Washington also seized 2 oil cargoes. Analysts don't really anticipate the Venezuelan president's capture to affect oil exporting Middle Eastern economies in the short term. given how long it will take to rebuild the oil and energy infrastructure in Venezuela, which will require billions of dollars worth of investment. However, Donald Trump did say that the US will take control of Venezuela without giving that much more detail, and say that US oil companies will go back into Venezuela and increase the oil production. Although this might take several years, we did see on Monday morning shares rising on some of the major oil producing companies, including Chevron and ExxonMobil, where shares were up around 4%.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.